from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
The AAP has been advocating for environmental protections for children since way back in 2007.
Now, updated policy outlines new steps we can take to mitigate the effects of climate change.
There's so much that we can do to help preserve a healthy future for our patients. So I would encourage pediatricians to embrace that role and work for hopeful solutions.
But first, it's April, and we're not fooling around about the research in our favorite journal.
It's hard to come up with sustainable interventions that address obesity. And so the fact that this had this effect is really, really notable.
These stories and more on Pediatrics on Call, the podcast on children's health from the AAP. I'm Dr. Joanna Parga-Belinkie.
And I'm Dr. David Hill. This podcast is for everyone in the medical community keeping our children healthy and safe.
It's a show by pediatricians for pediatricians.
But anyone who cares about kids will get a lot out of it as well.
Let's start today's episode with a research roundup from the journal Pediatrics.
We're starting a new month, and that means we get a visit from one of our podcast regulars.
This month, we're joined by Dr. Alex Kemper, the journal's deputy editor, and this is a fun fact, someone with amazing taste in children's books.
No, hang on, Joanna. How do you know that?
Well, when Zelda was born in December, he got my older kids one of their now favorite picture books, The Bear Who Wasn't There. It's a book about a bear, except it's really about a duck, and I don't want to give away too much of the plot besides that.
I'm really intrigued, but no spoilers, please.
I have to give credit to both my wife and my daughter, who are both teachers who have used that in their classrooms. So I'm glad you like it.
Oh, it's such a hit.
Oh, you've got the inside line
scoop. Yeah.
This, Alex. So while we've got you, are there another couple of books that you recommend because of this?
We'll have to get them on the line.
That would be great, yeah.
When you do the Books for Kids podcast, they will be there in a heartbeat.
What's your favorite from when you were growing up, Alex?
My favorite book when I was growing up? That's such a great question, and now I have to think about it.
All right, well, you have a whole podcast episode, so...
We'll save it for later.
We're going to come back to this, Alex. And since, actually Mira is entering kindergarten, my oldest, and she's learned how to read. And there's a lot of joy with her being in school. But in our country, going to school also makes you have anxiety about school shootings. And I know this issue of Pediatrics does have an article chronicling school shootings in this country. Alex, can you talk about that with us?
So we do have a very important paper on that topic entitled School Shootings in the United States from 1997 to 2022, written by Dr. Rapin and colleagues at Clemson University. And, one of the reasons to go back to 1997, 1998 school years, that was the year of Columbine. And, I have to say personally, I hate that we have to talk about this topic. What they found in this study was that there were over 1,400 school shootings in the United States during this period of time, and that school shootings in general seem to be increasing over the past 5 years. Now, in this study, they also look at what they define as mass shootings. So a mass shooting has 3 or more victims. So it doesn't look like there are trends in increasing numbers of mass shootings, but the mass shootings that are happening are more deadly. And this is a topic that we've spoken about a lot. There was Columbine, there was Sandy Hook, there's Uvalde. It's just really, obviously, a very sad topic, but one that we as pediatricians have to talk about. So I was surprised that during this period of time of the study, there were 11 school mass shootings, leading to 122 people who were killed and 126 that were injured. But there are some things that we can do about this. And there's a commentary that has run with the article written by Dr. Rebecca Bell from the University of Vermont, who talks about some practical things that we can do. The AAP has a module on how to store firearms. It's called Safer Storing Firearms Prevents Harm. There are things that we can do to promote this message to our families, to give gun locks and those kinds of things. And this commentary also makes the important point about knowing the details of the extreme risk protection order laws in your own states. Those are the red flag laws, so that if there's, somebody that you're really worried about, what are the rules around how that can be brought to attention? I think that pediatricians have a unique and important and powerful role in terms of advocacy. And this is a message that we have to get out about school shootings, and we should feel empowered to talk about it and do things within our local communities to help prevent these tragedies.
Well, I love you ending on a note of empowerment there, because this can seem like such an overwhelming issue. So we'll take that. I'm going to familiarize myself with these extreme risk protection order laws that you mentioned. And while the federal government has not done much to meaningfully address gun safety so far, they have intervened to help schools in other ways. The community eligibility provision is a federal universal free meals policy, and school meals have been shown to reduce food insecurity and improve children's academic performance. But are there even other ways that free school meals can benefit children, Alex?
David, this is a study that I really love, and it comes on the heels, if you remember, sometime recently we talked on this podcast about how making sure that children had free access to water could help with obesity and overweight. Well, this is a study that looks at the provision of universal free school meals and whether that can help with childhood obesity. This study was written by Dr. Anna Localio and colleagues at the University of Washington in Seattle. And what they did was they looked at schools that provided universal free school meals. So that comes under the community eligibility provision. And it's a national school lunch and also a school breakfast program. It provides free meals to all students. There's nutrition standards, providing it to all children without means testing at the individual student, reduces stigma, and again, ensures that everybody has access to this. And what they did was they looked in the state of California at 5th, 7th, and 9th grade students with the outcome being obesity, and they compared schools that participated in this program to schools that didn't provide universal free meals. And they found a 0.6% absolute reduction in obesity prevalence, which is the same thing as a 2.4% relative reduction. As you know, it's hard to come up with sustainable interventions that address obesity. And so the fact that this had this effect is really, really notable. And beyond that, and as you mentioned, there's so many other benefits to making sure that children get high quality nutrition during the day. This is just a win, and showing the reduction in obesity is, I almost hate to say this, but it's just gravy. You know what I mean? It's just that extra there. And it's something that we should really promote in our own communities. I know that where I live, the Columbus City Schools participates in a universal free meal program like this. So it's really, really effective with all sorts of spillover benefit.
I know in Philadelphia, we also have universal free meals, and sometimes my daughter participates in them, and she really enjoys the fat-free chocolate milk. So being in Philadelphia, I work at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is a world leader in pediatric research and innovation. And we have a whole sickle cell center, which uses cutting-edge treatments to help children with sickle cell anemia with new, exciting advancements in treating this disease. Are all children who need it getting access to quality care for this blood disorder?
So there are so many really exciting things going on around the treatment of sickle cell disease, including gene therapy. It's really, really exciting times, but it's also important that we not forget the basics. So when I'm talking about the basics, I'm talking about penicillin prophylaxis, so that we know that young children have a very high risk of pneumococcal sepsis if they have sickle cell disease. And penicillin prophylaxis, it's simple and it's effective. And another component about the management of sickle cell disease is the use of transcranial Doppler ultrasounds, because children and teens with sickle cell disease are at high risk of stroke. And if you could identify those at the highest risk, then you can do interventions like hypertransfusing them to reduce the amount of sickle hemoglobin that they have. These are recommendations that have been in place for quite a long time. In a study that we've recently released called National Quality Indicators in Sickle Cell Anemia, led by Dr. Anderson, who's at the Keck School of Medicine at USC, and colleagues, looked at the sickle cell data collection programs in California and Georgia. These are programs that are overseen by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they looked at two things. They looked at the proportion of children 3 months to 5 years who got antibiotic prophylaxis. And they looked at the proportion of children who got Doppler ultrasound. And you know what? It's a little discouraging. So about 1 in 5 children with sickle cell disease in California and about 16% in Georgia met the quality standard for receiving antibiotic prophylaxis in any of those given years. And only about half overall received assessment of stroke risk. So let's just say there's opportunities for improvement, but we know that these things are effective. We've been talking about these things for a long time, though, and the fact is that the numbers have not been great. So we also had a commentary go with this article by Dr. Susie Curry, who's at my institution, Nationwide Children's Hospital, and Dr. Sarah Reeves, who's at the University of Michigan, who asked the question, why are we still failing at giving these interventions and what kind of things can we do? And they identify two things that I think are important. One is holding people accountable for getting these services and also incentivizing them. So that's the population health perspective and making sure that all of us have a little bit of skin in the game. But the other thing that I think is really important is making sure that preventive services are provided at these comprehensive sickle cell clinics and thinking about novel ways that primary care pediatricians can partner with these specialty sickle cell clinics to make sure that children get the full umbrella of care, the full package of things that they ought to get. And I think they're really onto something, that we need to think better about how we can develop these partnerships between general pediatricians and subspecialists. And I think that the same story is probably true for a lot of other rare conditions or uncommon conditions, that there's opportunities for us to work together to make sure that families get the full battery of services.
Well, I love this idea of extending partnerships with our colleagues in the subspecialties. So that's a great takeaway. But I don't want to let you go without finding out the answer. What is your favorite children's book from childhood?
If you really want to know, Good Night Moon.
Oh, classic.
Who doesn't like that?
Who
Although,
doesn't?
just thinking about it, I'm feeling a little tired.
I was going to say, I'm getting hungry for a bowl of mush myself.
Oh, you know what our favorite thing always was? Finding the mouse. Because the mouse is almost on every page, but scurries about.
The illustrations are so wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Well, Alex, with that, we wanted to thank you for joining us today, for sharing your love of children's books and also some wonderful pediatrics articles.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll see you again in a few months.
For all of the articles we covered and more, join us at aap.org/podcast.
Coming up, we'll look at an updated policy statement and technical report on climate change and children's health.
David, how's the weather there in North Carolina?
Joanna, are you making small talk now?
No. You'll see.
Okay, well, I mean, it's gorgeous, but honestly, it's also kind of weird. I think my favorite 2 weeks here in Wilmington are when the tulip trees, the pears, the dogwoods, redbuds, and the wisteria are all blooming at once. And driving down the street is like living in a Monet watercolor.
Wow.
But I've noticed some of those trees are blooming earlier than I can ever remember.
I know what you mean. The cherry blossoms are already up here in Philadelphia, and they're pretty. But it's also a little disturbing. I mean, I love the pink color in the trees, but it does make me start to think about climate change.
Now I see where you're going with this. This talk isn't small at all. It is as big as the whole planet. Well, let's expand it further by adding the voice of Dr. Samantha Ahdoot, a practicing general pediatrician, assistant professor of medical education at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and board member of the Virginia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Dr. Ahdoot is also lead author of a new policy statement and technical report from the AAP, Climate Change and Children's Health, Building a Healthy Future for Every Child. Dr. Ahdoot, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
I can't imagine how much work went into these documents. Can you back up and tell us a little bit about the AAP's history with climate change and child health?
Sure. I'm so proud of the AAP because the AAP has been a thought leader in this space since 2007. We were the first medical society in the U.S. and that I know of in the world to publish a statement and a report on climate change and the health of our patients. And since 2007, the report was updated in 2015 and again this year. So the AAP has a long, proud history of advocating for environmental protections for children broadly and specifically on climate change.
Dr. Ahdoot, these articles cover several aspects of climate change, but let's start with the obvious one, the heat. How does the heat itself affect child health?
So I like to think of the effects of heat on children's health in several categories. First, there's the effect on our active, healthy young people and the effects of exertional heat illness. And that's when we're talking about heat exhaustion or even heat stroke. And that really is a risk for our healthy young patients who are very active in heat. For example, athletes. Particularly football players are the highest risk athletes from heat illness. Also young military recruits and young people who work outdoors. But outside of the exertional heat illness, there's also some groups of children who are at higher risk from heat, particularly young babies less than 1. And that's in large part because they can't express their needs. They can't seek a safer environment. Younger toddlers don't know if they need to drink more fluids or change their clothes. And then there's also the risk of hot cars, which is a major concern because children obviously can get entrapped in cars and can't get out. But there's other broader effects that I don't think we think of as much. And those are, for example, the effects of heat on learning. Children don't learn as well in hot environments. And in fact, there has been research that has demonstrated that children who are in hotter environments learn less. For example, a study of millions of PSAT takers found that for every 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in the average school year temperature, the amount that students learned went down by 1%. So learning is affected by heat. And lastly, I do want to touch on also how important it is where you live, how much heat you're exposed to. And there's something called the urban heat island effect. So man-made surfaces, concrete, buildings absorb a lot of heat, and then they let that heat out actually at night. And even within one city, a given neighborhood can be much hotter than another neighborhood because of the difference in how many trees there are, how much vegetation, and there's a strong relationship to equity in that difference. Communities that were redlined in the past, the neighborhoods that were rated as hazardous, which were communities of color, are now much hotter than neighborhoods in the same city that were rated as, quote, best, which were predominantly white. So there's a real justice issue in terms of heat exposure.
And we know that hotter air holds more water, and we saw in California how devastating these effects can be. Can you talk about how climate change and water interact when it comes to health?
Yes, there's a lot of intersections with rainfall patterns and too much water, too little water. I think you can think of it in several ways. One is these very heavy rainfall events we know are increasing, and flooding presents major challenges. I think Hurricane Harvey is perhaps one of the best examples. It's the highest total rainfall in the history of the country, 19 trillion tons of water. A whole year's worth of water fell in the Houston area in just a few days. And that really provided a case study of what happens when a given area is overwhelmed with that much water. It really overwhelmed their wastewater facilities. There were sewage overflows, tremendous number of hazardous material spills, and all these chemicals and pathogens are in this water, right? And so that presented a real challenge for safe drinking water. Also with what came afterwards in terms of mold contamination. And children are particularly risk to exposures to these toxins in water, whether they're pathogens or chemicals. Of course, there's also issues of less water, right? Too little water and drought. And we know that low rainfall, along with higher temperatures, can contribute to more wildfire weather, so to speak, and vulnerability to wildfire. And that's certainly a major concern out west. There's been larger areas burning. And now we know it's not just out west after the Canadian fires of last year. So wildfire smoke, to take it to the next step, I suppose you could say, is then presenting a much bigger challenge for air quality.
I'm so glad you mentioned the wildfires and the smoke. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. In a recent episode 194, we talked about the devastating wildfires on Maui. How does climate change play a role in these fires?
Yes, so the change in the water and precipitation patterns, less precipitation, a longer warm season, more heat extremes, they all promote wildfire risk. In addition, warming temperatures can indirectly affect wildfire risk by changes in pathogens that harm trees. So warmer winters can promote the survival of some insects, which then can damage the trees and create a large number of dead trees, which also increase the risk of wildfires. And wildfire smoke has really become a rising problem. U.S. air quality has dramatically improved over the decades as a result of the Clean Air Act. So we've had tremendous reductions in air pollution in this country as a result of that legislation. But what's happening is that the smoke is becoming a bigger contributor to particulate matter pollution. So, for example, a study from 2021, before last year's fires, found that about a quarter of the particulate matter pollution across the country is now from wildfire smoke, whereas 10 years ago it was like 10%. Whereas out west, like half of their particulate matter pollution is from wildfires, increased from about 20%. So it's a rising challenge.
So we're talking about the air quality and the loss of trees, and we know that this can mean that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are going to rise. But I'm curious about the carbon dioxide gas itself. Do we need to be worried about that as well?
That's such an interesting question. And I think it's been very interesting for me to learn from plant biologists about the role of CO2 on plants that we eat, plants that are allergenic. And there's so many intersections. CO2 is really plant food, is one of the substrates for plant growth. We all learned this in basic photosynthesis years ago. And so the changes in CO2 have a lot of effects on plants many of which are important for the health of people. For example, CO2 increases the amount of pollen produced by a lot of allergenic species, including ragweed, grass, and oak. That's one of the reasons that the allergy season has gotten longer and stronger. In North America, the pollen season is about 20 days, starting about 20 days earlier. And pollen counts are about 20% higher than in 1990. That's because of the rising temperature and probably secondarily the CO2. But rising CO2 also doesn't just change the growth of plants, it actually changes the composition of plants. Because plants are, quote, breathing, or that's not the correct word, but breathing, let's say, more CO2, they actually have a different composition. And so that's very important for some staple crops like wheat and rice, actually have lower concentrations of iron protein, and zinc when they are grown in higher CO2 environments. And that's a particular problem for countries that rely on those grains predominantly for the nutrition of children.
Locally, I've seen children with both tick-borne and mosquito-borne illnesses that never used to affect us here in North Carolina. What is the infectious disease outlook with these changes in our climate?
So the changing in the climate, warming temperatures, changing in precipitation patterns, has many effects on infectious disease patterns. When it comes to vector-borne infections, I think it's good to look at the role of climate change as being part of a range of other changes. For example, urbanization, mosquito control efforts, changes in host animal species, right? There's many factors which affect vector-borne diseases. And sometimes it can be quite difficult actually to parse out the role of climate change specifically. But where it gets a little easier is where you're looking at very northern latitudes. So where it used to be just too cold for ticks to survive. And a good example of that is Canada, right? So Canada didn't used to have any Lyme disease, and it's been just marching up. It just continues to expand its range into Canada. So that's one of the more clearer examples of the effects of climate change on vector-borne infections. And there's many other pathogens which are sensitive to temperature and precipitation. And I think we all know a lot of that kind of intuitively. For example, warmer temperatures promote the growth of some bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, which can contaminate food, right? So that is an issue. And also warmer temperatures promote the populations of some bacteria in the water. So a good example of that is Vibrio species. Also have a pretty direct relationship with water temperature. And seawater temperature, as the temperature goes up, it promotes the growth of Vibrio, and there are higher concentrations of Vibrio. So that's also a relationship which is a little bit more clear.
And while climate change affects us all, you mentioned some inequities with climate change when you talked about redlining and urban heat islands. What populations are most vulnerable to issues related to climate change?
So climate change effects can magnify existing disparities that result from racism and discrimination. There's significant disparities in pollution exposure, and that's often due to the location of polluting facilities. We know from satellite sensing data, combined with neighborhood level health data, that communities of lower education, of lower income, communities with a higher proportion of people of color, have a higher disease burden from pollution. And although pollution levels have decreased, the disparities in exposure persist. So there remains an unequal exposure to air pollution. And also, in every effect of climate change, it's very important to consider the ability to adapt and respond. And that's a very important factor in how vulnerable a community is. When a community is of lower income, or if they don't speak English, they don't have access to insurance for their homes, or to just relocate to another location, there's a much higher vulnerability from extreme weather events. And these vulnerabilities can have cascading effects, right? So if a family has their home burned down by a wildfire, but they don't have house insurance, they don't have the ability to rebuild, right? Then they may have to relocate. And that's going to cause significant financial hardship on that family. It may interrupt the child's education, access to healthcare, and financial well-being of the family. And these have multiple cascading effects, which just reinforce vulnerability to other extreme weather events in the future.
You know, I felt like the world was a lot cooler when I was growing up. And by that, I mean the climate seemed fairly stable. But kids today are facing mental health challenges from this recognition that what they're seeing around them seems quite unstable. How can we help them deal with the mental health challenges of this climate?
So pediatricians now, we're assuming a much greater responsibility for the care of mental health challenges in children. And so it's increasingly important that we incorporate the role of climate change and environmental harm in our work with children and their mental health. And pediatricians in this country are already caring for children whose mental health is affected. A large study from Lancet found that approximately a third of children in the U.S. feel that the government is failing young people and are frightened of the future. So I think one of the most important things we need to do as pediatricians is recognize the role of climate change on the mental health of our patients. For example, when we care for children affected by extreme weather events, recognize that these are not just isolated emergencies, but see them in the broader context of climate change and help children to process this. And one of the ways that we can do that is by engaging them in solutions. Young people are powerful agents of change, and engaging them in climate advocacy, supporting their work is a vital step that we can play to help them see the power of their own voice as agents of change.
So as you can see, Sam, when I asked David about the weather, I wasn't making small talk. This has been a really huge conversation. Can you think of one takeaway to leave our listeners with before they go read these articles?
I would suggest that pediatricians recognize the unique power that we have to speak on behalf of children and to advocate for them for climate change solutions that will be the foundation for their health now and in the future. And there's so much that pediatricians can do, whether it's in their homes, at their city council, and at the state level, whether it's with a Girl Scout troop or their local school. We can help increase clean energy sources in our communities, create greater access to vegetables and grains, diets with less highly processed meat and sugar. We can help build shaded routes for families to walk and bike. There's so much that we can do to help preserve a healthy future for our patients. So I would encourage pediatricians to embrace that role and work for hopeful solutions for ourselves and our patients.
Well, that is a charge that I think we're all going to take very seriously. Dr. Samantha Ahdoot, thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's my pleasure.
To read the policy statement and technical report, Climate Change and Children's Health, Building a Healthy Future for Every Child, go to aap.org/podcast.
At the end of every episode, we like to leave you with something positive or enlightening. We call this segment Say Ah. David, what's your Say Ah this week?
Okay, so mine's a little odd, but stay with me here. It's spring here in coastal North Carolina, and that means the alligators are back. And I remain just utterly fascinated by the fact that I can walk down the street and see alligators sunning themselves on the side of the retention pond. So when Sellers was home briefly from college for his spring break, we went out there, and he has this telephoto lens and loves to take nature photos. And he got some magnificent close-up appearing photos of the gators, and he wasn't as far away as he might have been. I can put up a photo of him taking the photos, but welcome back, Al E. Gator.
Oh, that's so fun. It's like seeing a dinosaur,
Yeah, it is.
So my Say Ah, hold on, there's a visual, David, which our listeners can't see, but let me grab it.
Okay, we can describe this vividly.
All right, here it is.
Oh, this visual for our listeners
Zelda.
is the most incredibly adorable
today.
2-month-old baby you have
And it's the
ever
end
seen.
of my maternity leave coming up, and so I'm bringing Zelda down into the recording studio one last time, and then I have to head back to work. So we're having someone come care for her during the day. We're going the nanny route, which is a difficult decision, but one that our family needed to do. So I'm at once sad, right, because my maternity leave is ending, but at once happy to be getting back to work, to be seeing some other babies too, and to be sharing that experience with my babies at home too. So Zelda says hi.
Hello, Zelda.
Hello.
We have to put this hair up on social media for our listeners to see because it is truly extraordinary.
She does have a full head of hair and an amazing cowlick right now.
Oh, wow. That's it for today's episode. If you like Pediatrics on Call, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Pediatrics on Call.
Pediatrics on Call is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our producer and editor is Ann Johnsos. Our audio engineer is Doug Nagel. Joe Puskars is our associate producer, and Susan Martin is our executive producer. Our theme music was composed by Matthew Simonson. Join us next week when we'll look at diagnosing autism spectrum disorder in the medical home.
We'll talk to the author of a new tip sheet, Dr. Katie Zuckerman. I'm Dr. David Hill.
And I'm Dr. Joanna Parga-Belinkie. Thanks for listening. Say bye, Zelda.
Bye-bye.